Find somewhere comfortable. Wherever you are right now, let your body settle into it. You don't need to follow this closely. You don't need to remember any of it. There is nothing here that requires your attention, nothing that needs to be held onto. Just let the words arrive, softly, the way sounds do when you are almost asleep and the world is still moving somewhere outside the window, but it no longer feels urgent or close. Tonight, we are going somewhere quiet, somewhere slow. We are going into the forest, though you don't need to picture it clearly. Just the idea of trees, the stillness between them, the way light moves differently in there, softer and more patient than anywhere else. You may drift at any point. That is not only allowed, it is welcome. The forest will still be here if you surface for a moment. And if you don't surface at all, that is perfectly fine too. We are in no hurry tonight. We never were. Just breathe and let the words come to you like the first cool air of an evening you had almost forgotten to notice. There is something worth sitting with, quietly, before we go any further. A forest is not a collection of individual trees. It only looks that way from the outside. When you stand at the edge of a wood and look in, what you see is a kind of gathering. Separate trunks, separate canopies, each tree apparently standing on its own. But beneath your feet, if you were to look, you would find something else entirely. Something vast and slow and ancient, running through the dark beneath the soil, like the longest, most patient conversation you can imagine. It is called the mycorrhizal network, a web of fine fungal threads, impossibly thin, connecting root to root across the forest floor. Some scientists have taken to calling it the wood wide web, which is a gentle sort of name for something so quietly extraordinary. Through this network, trees pass things between themselves. Sugars, nutrients, water, signals that something is wrong or that something is needed. The forest, it turns out, has been talking all along. We simply did not know how to listen. Let that settle. Peter Wohlleben, a German forester who spent decades walking among beech trees in the mountains of Western Germany, wrote about this at length in a book called The Hidden Life of Trees. He described arriving slowly at the understanding that the forest he had been managing was not a resource to be harvested, but a community in conversation. He wrote about old trees supporting younger ones in the shade, passing carbon through the network to seedlings that could not yet reach the light on their own. He used words like friendship, which made scientists uneasy. But the image itself, the old and the young connected beneath the ground, the larger sustaining the smaller, that image stays with you. It is something worth holding gently, without needing to decide what it means. The fungal threads involved are called mycorrhizae, and they are ancient things, far older than the trees themselves. Fungi and plant roots have been growing together, intertwined, for hundreds of millions of years. The relationship is one of those quiet arrangements that the natural world makes with itself over enormous spans of time, unhurried, gradual, mutually agreed upon, in the way that only deep time allows. The fungi extend far beyond where the tree's own roots could reach, gathering phosphorus and water from distant pockets of soil. In return, the tree offers sugars, carbon it has drawn from the air and converted through sunlight into something the fungus can use. A slow trade, an ancient one. Breathe. What Suzanne Simard, a forest ecologist at the University of British Columbia, has spent decades studying is how this network, does more than simply move resources. It moves information. In her research, she was able to show that when one tree is stressed, perhaps attacked by insects or damaged, chemical signals travel through the network to neighboring trees. And those neighboring trees respond. They begin producing defensive compounds of their own, even before any insects have reached them. They prepare, slowly, quietly, in the way that only something with deep patience can prepare. Simard also found that forests organize themselves around what she calls mother trees. These are the oldest and largest trees in a given area, the ones whose roots have spread furthest, and whose connections through the network are the most numerous. They are, in a sense, the most listened to voices in the forest. When Simard tagged the carbon moving through the network, she found that it flowed toward seedlings, and particularly toward the seedlings of the mother tree's own species. Not exclusively. The network is generous in a broader sense too. But there was a particular quality to the way the oldest trees tended the youngest, a kind of orientation toward continuation. You may have drifted. That is fine. There is something in all of this that is deeply restful to consider, if you let it be. The idea that the world beneath the ground is soft with activity, unhurried and largely invisible. That while the surface of things appears still, especially at night, especially in winter, a slow and patient exchange is continuing. Carbon moving through fungal threads in the dark, nutrients finding their way from one root system to another. The forest, in its own way, breathing. Trees also communicate above the ground, though that is a different and perhaps more surprising thing. When certain trees are browsed by insects or animals, they release chemical compounds into the air, volatile chemicals, carried gently on whatever wind is moving through the canopy. Neighboring trees detect these compounds and respond, beginning to produce their own defensive chemicals, making their leaves less palatable before the threat has reached them. It is a form of warning that requires no sound, no gesture, just chemistry, drifting softly through the air between them. There is no rush. Some trees do this more readily than others. Willows, maples, and certain pines have been observed doing it. The signals are subtle, and for a long time, no one thought to look for them. They were always there, moving through the quiet air of forests that we walked through, believing were silent. The forest was never silent. It was simply speaking in a register we had not yet learned to hear. What is restful about this, perhaps, is the patience of it. There is no urgency in the way a tree communicates. A chemical released into the air drifts where the air carries it, and the neighboring tree receives it when it does, and responds over hours or days. The time scale of a tree is simply different from ours. A tree that lives for 300 years holds time differently. What feels slow to us may feel immediate to something that marks seasons rather than minutes. Just the sound of the words. Peter Vorleben wrote about watching a beech tree he had known for many years finally die. He noted that the surrounding trees, the ones whose roots had grown alongside and intertwined with the dying tree's roots for decades, appeared to respond. The network around the stump continued for a time to deliver small amounts of sugar to the dead wood. Whether this represents something we might call care, or whether it is simply the inertia of an old established connection, is not entirely clear. Scientists debate this carefully, but the observation itself has a kind of weight to it that is worth sitting with quietly, without needing to resolve. Breathe. The wood wide web is not without its complications. There are trees that take more than they give, that tap into the network without offering much in return. Certain orchids, for example, have evolved to be almost entirely dependent on the network, drawing sugars without photosynthesizing in any meaningful way. There are parasitic plants that attach to roots and draw what they need without contributing. The network is vast and ancient and generous, but it is not perfectly equitable. It is, in that way, a little like most living systems. Imperfect, patient, continuing anyway. What the research has given us is a quieter sense of what a forest is, not a stand of separate individuals competing for light and water, though there is some of that too, but also a community with deep structural connections, a kind of slow solidarity that operates beneath the surface, largely out of sight, without announcement. The trees do not choose this. They do not deliberate. And yet the network persists, has persisted for millions of years, passing resources and signals through the dark soil of forests all over the world. Let that settle for a moment. There is something in that image that feels almost like comfort. The oldest trees in a forest, patient and quiet, their roots reaching deep and far, their connections spanning the forest floor, holding the younger trees in a kind of invisible regard, not loudly, not urgently, just steadily, in the way that deep things tend to do. And the forest floor itself, dark and cool and alive, with threads of fungi, carrying messages through the soil that no one asked it to carry, that no one directed, that arose from something older and slower than intention. A conversation begun before language existed, still ongoing, still quiet, still gentle in the dark beneath the trees. We continue softly. If you are still awake, or partly so, let that image rest with you. The forest at night, still on the surface, the faint movement of air between the trunks, and below, in the unseen dark, the ancient threads of the network, passing something gently from one root to another, a slow gift, an unhurried exchange, the oldest form of patience the world knows. And so, we leave it there. The forest is still, as it always is at this hour. The trees are quiet in the way they always are, doing what they have always done, slowly and without announcement. Somewhere in the dark, beneath the roots, the ancient network continues, as it has for longer than we can comfortably imagine, patient, settled, unhurried. Behind you, the day is already distant. Let it stay there. You have nothing left to do with it tonight. The forest holds its conversation without you, gently, in the dark. Drift now, if you are ready. Sleep well.